I took the job at the county records archive because I needed something quiet. That's how I described it to my wife at the time. I just need something quiet for a while. I'd been working dispatch for the fire department for 6 years, and the burnout had gotten physical. Chest tightness. Tinnitus, that wouldn't fade. I was grinding my teeth down to nothing in my sleep. My doctor said I needed to step away from high-stimulus work, and my brother-in-law knew someone at the county building who said they had a position open. Records retrieval. Part-time to start, full-time, if it worked out. Or at least, it seemed like it would. The Blackford County Records Archive is in the basement level of the old municipal building on Hardin Street. It's not what most people picture when they hear archive. There's no grand library feeling, no tall shelves with rolling ladders. It's a government basement. Drop ceilings with water stains. Fluorescent tubes that hum at slightly different pitches depending on which section you're in. Gray metal shelving units that run in long rows, maybe 40 feet deep, labeled with paper cards slid into plastic holders. The air smells like old cardboard and that particular dusty sweetness that comes from paper slowly decomposing in a climate-controlled space, except the climate control barely works. In summer it gets humid enough that we run dehumidifiers at the end of every row, and in winter the heating system clanks so loud you'd think someone was down in the mechanical room hitting pipes with a wrench. My job was straightforward. Departments upstairs, planning, assessor's office, clerk's office, public health. Occasionally the sheriff's department would submit retrieval requests through a shared system. The requests would come in on my terminal, which was an old desktop running software that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2008. Each request had a file number, a department of origin, a date range, and sometimes a brief description. I'd locate the file in the stacks, pull it, log the retrieval in our physical ledger and in the system, then send it upstairs via a dumbwaiter that connected to the first-floor mailroom. My supervisor was a woman named Darlene who had been working in the archive for 22 years. She was in her late 50s, had a bad knee, and kept a small radio on her desk, tuned to a classic country station at low volume. She handled the administrative side, the cataloging, the accessioning of new records, the correspondence with departments about retention schedules. I handled the physical retrieval. We shared the basement, but our desks were on opposite ends of the room, separated by about 60 feet of shelving. Most days we'd talk in the morning, maybe at lunch if we happened to take it at the same time, and again briefly before leaving. She was pleasant, but not chatty. She had that particular quality of someone who had spent decades working alone and had become very comfortable with silence. Well, mine asked. For the first 3 months, everything was fine. Now, the work was monotonous in a way that I actually found soothing. Pull the request, find the file, log it, send it up. Maybe 12 to 15 requests on a busy day, sometimes as few as 3 or 4. The filing system was logical once you learned it. Files were organized first by department, then by year, then by a sequential number. So a file labeled PH-20190-334 would be a public health file from 2019, the 334th record accessioned that year. I got fast at navigating the stacks. I knew which sections had gaps where files had been permanently removed, which shelves were overstuffed where the labeling got inconsistent because of a previous employee who apparently couldn't keep sequential numbers straight. It was in my 4th month that the first one came in. I remember the date because it was a Tuesday, and Darlene had called in sick, which she rarely did. As a Plaskai died is en diskai vinselfer, I see I ushi did. Ide I see vinsefer, It, bull, dare. Maybe I, bull. That's that havin' seven sefta. Kaiven sefen after nighting, I sigh ven sefen sefens. It was just me in the basement. The request came through around 10:15 in the morning. It 10, for staff, ak is mez. 19 is camesack, with coo. My coo. I'm as camesack. Assessor's office. The file number was AS202408891. The description field said, Property Reassessment, Parcel 77-04-112, Boundary Dispute Resolution. Routine stuff. I went to the assessors section. Found the 2024 range. The files in that section went up to AS202400743. Nothing not a piece des IS, 7430, 743. When I cast there was no 0891. The file didn't exist. This wasn't particularly alarming. It happened occasionally. Someone upstairs would transpose a number or reference an old file number that had been superseded by a new one during a reorganization. I logged it as file not located in the system, added a note suggesting the requester verify the file number, and moved on. 2 days later, another one came in. This time, from the planning department. PL Kratima Domi 12 Kratima 0111 Doi. The description said, Variance application 445 Ridgecrest Drive, residential to mixed use. I went to the planning section, 2025 range. The files stopped at PL 20250067. We were only in April of 2025 at that point. The 67th file had been accessioned just the previous week. There simply hadn't been enough new records created yet to reach 0112. I logged it the same way. File not located. Suggested verification. I mentioned it to Darlene the next morning, casually. Got a couple requests this week for files that don't seem to exist. Numbers are too high. She barely looked up from her desk. Probably someone using projected numbers from the budget system. They do that sometimes. Planning especially, they'll reference a file number from a pending application before it's actually been assigned. Just kick it back. I let it go. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more came in. All from different departments. All for file numbers that were beyond the current sequential range for their respective sections. One was from Public Health PH 20250445, and we were only up to PH 20250201 at the time. Another was from the clerk's office, requesting a file from 2026. A year that hadn't happened yet. Chile 2026-0023. Death certificate, Warren Judith M., DOD, January 14th, 2026. I stared at that one for a while. Not because I was frightened. I wasn't, but because it was specific in a way the others hadn't been. A date of death. A date of death 7 months in the future. I assumed it was a typo. 2026 instead of 2016, maybe. Aldemices. I searched our records for any file matching a Warren Judith M. and found nothing. I logged it as not located and added a note. Verify year 2026 appears to be an error. I didn't hear anything back. None of the departments ever responded to my notes. That was normal too. Most of the time, if someone realized they'd made a mistake, they'd just submit a new request with the correct number. The erroneous ones just sat in the system, marked as unfulfilled. But they kept. By the end of my 5th month, I'd logged 11 requests for files that didn't exist. Files with numbers that hadn't been assigned yet. I started keeping a separate list on a yellow legal pad, not officially, just for myself. File number, department, date of request, description. I kept the pad in my desk drawer. Here's what started to bother me, and I want to be clear that I recognize this could be coincidence or pattern recognition bias, or whatever you want to call it. But the descriptions were getting more specific. The first few had been generic property disputes, variance applications, assessment records. But as they continued, they started including details that felt lived in. A request from the Sheriff's Department for a case file numbered SD20251847 was described as Incident Report Single Vehicle Accident Route 9 south of mile marker 22, 1 fatality. The Assessor's Office requested AS20251203 with the note Post-Loss Reassessment Fire Damage 1120 Glenwood Court, Total Loss. Public Health submitted a request for PH20250667. Communicable Disease Investigation, Blackford Elementary, Cluster Identification. None of these files existed. The numbers were all higher than our current count. But may be wise thou be that. But the descriptions read like real records. They had the cadence of actual file notes, the abbreviations, the formatting, the particular bureaucratic flatness that you learn to recognize after months of handling these documents. I brought it up to Darlene again, this time more directly. I showed her my list. She put on her reading glasses and looked at it for maybe 30 seconds, then handed it back. Glitch in the system, she said. That software is ancient. I've been asking them to update it for years, probably pulling from some test database or something. But the descriptions are specific, I said. They have names, addresses, details. She shrugged. Template data. When they built the system, they probably populated it with sample entries. Sometimes old databases burp up test records. I've seen it before. When? When have you seen it before? She looked at me over her glasses. Not unkindly, but with that particular patience that long-tenured government employees have for newer staff who get worked up over procedural oddities. It happens, Nathan. It's an old system. Log them and move on. That's the job. So I did. For a while. The thing about working alone in a basement is that you have too much time to think. I'm also Mac device I buy. My can pay in 9 denaudia woin and templi stime. My can papely stime that 9 sime saufer wine. My can papely sumply sime that 9 simes of or by sumply. My can papely sumply sumply. Why can papely sumply. The requests kept coming 2 or 3 a week now, mixed in with the legitimate ones. When the parted hour is whence expected, when second hours are due is quiet, when the high hours is quiet as we I requises that where we nighs as that we I could always tell which were which. The real requests had file numbers within our current range. My ASTI for I fat. Why ASTI for why why asked on the record. One setter a knive he was nons and tasses and two with may dast with side with con dies. The others didn't. I started calling them the forwards in my head because that's what they felt like. Requests forwarded from some future filing system that hadn't caught up to the present yet. I want to pause here and acknowledge something. I'm aware of how this sounds. I'm aware that a reasonable person would say the explanation was obvious, either a system glitch, as Darlene suggested, or someone in one of the departments upstairs making a recurring error. Maybe even someone doing it deliberately as a weird joke. I considered all of these possibilities. YL1D. I want you to understand that I'm not someone who jumps to irrational conclusions. I worked dispatch for 6 years. You learn to assess information calmly. You learn to separate signal from noise. But here's what changed things for me. In my 7th month, I was doing a routine shelving check, going through sections to make sure files were in order, looking for misfiled documents, that kind of thing. Darlene had me do this once a month. I was in the public health section, 2025 range, and I noticed that the sequential count had increased. Idaka to din, Idaka. Idaka, Idaka, Idaka. Idaka, Idaka, Idaka. When I'd last checked, maybe 2 weeks prior, we were up to PH 202500312. Now, the last file on the shelf was PH 202500340. New files get accessioned regularly, but I kept going. Beyond 0340, the shelf was empty. Unquote. Ola was empty. This where the tanger zero. Nigh. Without the county records a zero. Weiss. You can't have files that haven't been created yet, sitting on a shelf. Except, I noticed something I'd never noticed before. At the far end of the row, past where the current files ended, there were shelf labels. Small white cards in plastic holders, same as everywhere else. I'd always assumed they were blanks pre-positioned labels for future use, so that when new files came in, the shelves were ready. That made sense. That was good. I walked down to look at them more closely. What? They weren't blank. They had file numbers on them. PH20250341 through PH20250380. Written in the same hand as all the other labels. Same blue ballpoint pen. Same slightly cramped printing that I recognized as Darlene's handwriting. I stood there for a long time, looking at them. Labels for files that didn't exist yet. Pre-written. Ready for files to fill them. This was, I told myself, perfectly explainable. Darlene had probably made them in advance based on projected accessioning rates. One kide. But one kide. She'd been doing this for 22 years. She probably knew roughly how many files each department generated per month and could prepare labels ahead of time. It was efficient. It was good practice. I checked the assessors section. Same thing. Labels extending about 40 files beyond the current count. Same handwriting. Same blue pen. I checked the clerk section. The sheriff section. Planning. All the same. Labels pre-positioned for files that hadn't arrived yet. I checked the numbers against my yellow legal pad. 3 of the forward requests I'd received matched label numbers that were pre-positioned on the shelves. On the shelves. Not 7992 or resses as I'd. Were whining ow. On sows and resses and 921 to men now. One have a dear. One ow resse. And manaus and nouses and resses. Resses and resses and resses and 92. Bah! One ow. PH 20250667. The Communicable Disease Investigation at Blackford Elementary. There was a label for it. Wine. Row 7, Section C, third shelf from the top. Empty space behind the label waiting to be filled. A. ESED 20251203, the Fire Damage Reassessment. Label present. Row 3, Section A, empty. SD 2025-1847, the single vehicle accident on Route 9. I found the Sheriff's Department section, 2025 range, and followed the labels past where the current files ended. My lie. My lied. My lied dad. My lied that sit it. They kept going. Much further than I expected. The labels continued for what must have been 200 files beyond our current count. And there it was. SD 2025-1847. A white card in a plastic holder, sitting above an empty shelf space, waiting for a file that had been requested weeks ago, but didn't exist. I went back to my desk and sat down. The fluorescent light above me was buzzing at that slightly higher pitch that it did when the weather changed. I could hear one of the dehumidifiers cycling on in Section B. The radio at Darlene's desk was playing something quiet and twangy that I couldn't identify. I pulled out my legal pad and started comparing dates more carefully. The first forward request had come in on March 15th. One zerin see, Sackted and Weria and in company South. In common pays and 1 zerins and 1 zeri and diamonds, 1 zerins and 1 Astakauf. Mast acted that 1 zerins and sackted zerins and 1 zerins and sackted zerins 1 zer. The file number was AS202-40891. I went back to the Assessor's 2024 section. The last file currently on the shelf was AS202-40743. I counted the empty, labeled spaces beyond it. They went up to AS20240900, YS, YSTAISTSTSTSTSTS, YSTSTSTSTSTSTSTSTSTS. As I was standing there counting, I heard the dumbwaiter motor engage. A new file was being sent down for shelving. My IBO file was a sent down Mayane. Thou's ad Wen. Wah. Well, I went over and opened the small door. Inside was a manila folder with the standard accessioning form clipped to the front. Askratima domi dozet shipatro kratima zero shapte patro patro. A new file from the assessor's office, ready to be shelved. I put it in its place. The label was already there, waiting for it. Over the next few weeks, I watched. I kept track. New files came down through the dumbwaiter daily, sometimes 3 or 4, sometimes a dozen. Each one had a label already waiting for it on the shelf. This was normal. This was Darlene's system. She made labels in advance. But the forward requests kept coming too, and I started tracking something else. I started tracking how fast the current file count was approaching the numbers that had been requested. The first one I tracked was PH20250445, the Communicable Disease Investigation. The Estigor. They are teen Mädchen. For star, I won to Danting. Well, maybe Seth. When the request came in, we were at PH20250201. By mid-June, we were at PH20250298. Espine 9 send Prasav with Wavin 98. Espine 9 sended Dews, Vero Dews, and Dashberated Mandanest. We eyed D's and Mini S. Tive, Taze 0. We asked by minted June. We were at PH20250290. By early July, 0334. Maybe, yeah. One do. I one side down John to 2 to second house. I one side down John to 2. By second house, 0 second house ax. Common for dowsen 2y. One was, Connens and Zass, one wow's ass, one wisen likes. The numbers were climbing steadily, getting closer to 0445 at a rate of about 3 to 5 new public health files per week. Day. Why, not 3. When I did the math. At that rate, we'd reach PH20250445 sometime in September. Maybe early October. I want you to understand what this implied. Someone had submitted a request for a file that wouldn't exist for another 5 or 6 months. A file about a disease investigation at an elementary school. They'd submitted the request in April. Maybe 20 hours. Maybe some I. Dak, righted daxed, righted daxed, righted daxed, and daxed, righted daxed, righted daxed, wided daxed, righted daxed, righted daxed, simple, raxed. The file wouldn't be created until fall. Either someone upstairs was requesting files from the future, or the future was somehow already cataloged in our system. Or, and this is what I kept telling myself, it was a coincidence. Template data. A glitch. The description in the request didn't necessarily mean it was real. For spect, it was just text in a database field. It didn't mean there would actually be a communicable disease investigation at Blackfirm Elementary in September. I told myself this. I told myself this many times. Then, on a Thursday in late July, I was shelving a new batch of clerk's office files when I noticed something that made me put everything down and sit on the floor between the stacks. The file I'd just shelved was CL20250178 78XA Z CXA Day. That side was a side a standard vital records entry. I was about to stand up and move on when I noticed the label next to it. CL 2025-0179. Empty space. Normal. But I looked further down the row, following the prepositioned labels, and I found myself doing something I'd been avoiding. I walked all the way down past 018002000250, past where the shelf unit ended and into the next row where the sequence continued. The labels kept going. CL 2025-0003-0003-500400. I kept walking, past the main archive room, into the back section that Darlene called Overflow. I'd been back there before, but only to the first few rows. Beyond that, it was just empty shelving. Or so I'd thought. The labels continued. They went on and on. Through one row into the next, around the corner into a section I'd never actually entered before. The lights back there were dimmer. Some of the tubes were burnt out and hadn't been replaced. But I could still read the labels. CL 202-50500. CL 2025-0600. The clerk's office didn't generate 600 files in a year. Factorin, Centrin, not Tactorin 10. Centrin not Tactorin way to was my eye, was Camus's ditendrins. Mature dot is, YL buys for rested natsties, YL by L buys and tain she's. We were barely at 178 by late July. Not I. Calm-sided. When 600 would be far beyond what any normal year would produce. I kept going. The shelving units in this back section were older, more industrial. The metal was a slightly different color, darker gray, almost green. The labels here were in a different hand. But were praff. That Not Darlene's cramped blue printing. These were written in black ink, in a rounder, more careful script. They were also slightly yellowed, as if they'd been there for a long time. CL 2025-0700. CL 2025-0800. I stopped at CL 202-60023. Fixo. First, DLE, DLE 0 N dash. Said, TLE 023. I sighed. The label I'd seen referenced in a request months ago. But, by YS. By YS. Death certificate, Warren, Judith M., DOD, January 14th, 2026. The label was there, written in that rounded black script, slightly yellowed. It looked like it had been there for years. The shelf space behind it was... but it was waiting. I stood there in the dim overflow section, listening to the hum of a dehumidifier somewhere behind me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. That chest tightness. That feeling from dispatch, when a call comes in and you know from the caller's voice that someone is already dead and you're just going through the motions. My fennis back did, and when dak. Common then asked Ed. That I dead in your den dacking when... Why... back? While I expected, and while I ked. Hi... Why... Fry for... I walked back to the front. I sat at my desk. I opened the retrieval system on my terminal and looked up the original request for CL20260023. It had been submitted on April 8th by someone in the clerk's office. The system logged which terminals submitted each request, but not which individual user. The terminal ID was CLT04. I didn't know which desk that was. I'd never been upstairs to the clerk's office. I pulled up all the forward requests I'd received and checked the terminal IDs. Bah! We have 4. And boy, they were all different. Different departments, different terminals. There was no single person submitting them all. I went home that night and looked up Warren Judith M. in the online county directory. I found a Judith M. Warren listed at 203 Birch Lane, Blackford. She appeared to be a real person. I found a reference to her in the minutes of a town council meeting from 2019 she'd spoken during public comment about a drainage issue. The minutes described her as a resident of Birch Lane, but they... She was a real person. And somewhere in our system, a request existed for her death certificate. A death certificate dated January 14th, 2026. A date that was still 6 months away. I didn't sleep well that night. Or the next night. My wife noticed. She asked if work was stressing me out, and I said no, it was fine. Just adjusting to the new schedule. She didn't push it. She was used to me being quiet after bad shifts at dispatch. She probably assumed it was the same thing. Something I'd encountered at work that I didn't want to talk about. And in a way, she was right. The next week, I started paying attention to something I'd previously ignored. Darlene's schedule. She arrived every morning at 7:30, half an hour before me. She left every evening at 4:30, half an hour after me, which meant there were periods every day when she was alone in the archive. An hour in the morning. An hour in the evening. I started wondering about the labels in the back section. That I-N, Ka, I. The ones in black ink, in the different handwriting. They weren't Darlene's. Whose were they? I asked her, as casually as I could manage. No. I once signed Nye, Die had. Hey, Darlene, the labels in the overflow section, the ones in black ink, were those from the person who had this job before me? She was eating a sandwich at her desk. She chewed, swallowed, took a sip of Diet Cola. Which overflow section? The back one, past the main stacks. The shelving goes pretty far back there. Oh, back there. That's old. That's from before my time. Russell, I think. Or maybe the person before Russell. They pre-labeled a lot of shelving. Optimistic about growth, I guess. She smiled slightly. We've never come close to filling all of it. How far back does it go? She shrugged. I don't go back there much. Bad knee. She tapped her left leg. It's just empty shelving mostly. Some of the dehumidifiers back there don't even work anymore. I've been meaning to put in a maintenance request. I nodded. Let it go. Went back to work. But that weekend, I went to the county building on a Saturday. I told my wife I needed to catch up on some filing. I had a key all archive staff did. The building was mostly empty on weekends, just a security guard at the front desk who barely looked up when I signed in. I went down to the basement. The archive was dark except for the emergency exit signs casting a red glow over the rows. I turned on the lights section by section as I went deeper into the stacks. Past the main archive room, into the overflow section. Past where I'd stopped before. Ties. Naid. Tive. I kept going. The shelving went much further back than I'd realized. One Mycan. Zeride. One Mycansa. One Mide. By. The basement of the municipal building was larger than the occupied space above it. I would learn later that it had been built in the 1940s as part of a civil defense plan, with underground sections that extended beneath the adjacent street. The archive only officially occupied about 2/3 of the basement level. Why, where? Comment. Why? The rest was supposed to be unused. But the shelving continued. And the labels continued. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. I walked past clerk's files for 2026, 2027, 2028. I found shelving sections for departments I didn't even recognize labels with prefixes I'd never seen in the retrieval system. WM. I had no idea what department that was. He's equally unfamiliar. HL. Nothing I could identify. The labels in this far back section were in multiple different handwritings. Some in the black rounded script. Some in red ink, cramped and angular. Some that looked almost like they'd been typed on a typewriter, cut out and inserted into the holders. Some that were faded almost to illegibility. And the years. I kept reading the years on the labels. 2027, 2028, 2030, 2035. I walked for what felt like 10 minutes, deeper into sections where the lights didn't work at all, and I had to use my phone's flashlight. The air was different back here, colder, with a musty dampness that the dehumidifiers didn't reach. The floor changed from tile to bare concrete. The ceiling was lower, the pipes more exposed. I stopped at a section where the labels read CL2051. The shelves were empty. All of them, as far as I could see. Empty metal shelving stretching into darkness, labeled and waiting. Waiting for files that wouldn't be created for another 26 years. I should have felt terror. That's what you'd expect. But what I actually felt was something closer to nausea, that physical vertigo you get when your understanding of something fundamental shifts. Like finding out that a building you've been working in has a room you've never seen, and that room is larger than all the rooms you know combined. I walked back. It took me a long time. When I reached my desk, I sat down and looked at the terminal. The screen was dark. I hadn't turned it on. But as I sat there in the silence of the empty archive, the system made a sound. The notification tone. A request coming in, I turned on the monitor. The screen flickered, then settled into the familiar blue-gray interface. There was a new request in the queue, submitted at 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday, when no one should have been working upstairs. The file number was SD202600003. Sheriff's Department, 2026. Description. Missing persons report, while Nathan R. Last seen vicinity of Hardin Street Municipal Building. My name is Nathan Weil. I sat very still. The basement was completely silent, except for the hum of the one overhead light I'd left on. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the tiny ticks of the building settling, pipes contracting in the walls as the heating system cycled off. I read the request again. I read it 3 more times. Then I took a screenshot. The system allowed that, and I logged out. I left the building. I signed out at the security desk. The guard didn't look up. I drove home. I didn't tell my wife anything. I sat in the living room and watched television without seeing it until she went to bed, and then I sat in the dark and thought, here's what I considered. 1. Someone was pranking me. This was possible. Someone who knew my name, knew I worked in the archive, knew I'd been pulling these anomalous requests. But who? Darlene? She seemed completely indifferent to the whole thing. Someone in one of the departments upstairs? How would they know what I'd been finding? 2. I was losing my mind. Also possible. I'd left dispatch because of burnout. Maybe the burnout was worse than I thought. Maybe I was experiencing some kind of break. But the screenshot was real. The labels in the overflow section were real. I could touch them. 3. The system was simply malfunctioning in a way that happened to produce my name. Nathan and Weil are not uncommon. Maybe it was pulling from personnel records, combining data randomly, generating nonsense requests. 3 felt like the best option. I held on to 3. On Monday, I went back to work. Darlene was there as usual at her desk with her radio. I said good morning. She said good morning. I sat at my terminal and looked at the request queue. The Saturday request was gone. Not marked as fulfilled, not marked as unfiled, simply absent from the system. As if it had never been submitted. I checked the system logs. Every request that came in was supposed to be logged with a timestamp and terminal ID, even if it was later canceled. I scrolled through the Saturday entries, but there were none. The system showed no activity between Friday at 4:15 p.m. and Monday at 7:34 a.m. I'd taken a screenshot, though. I'd saved it to the desktop. I opened my files. The screenshot was there. I opened it. It showed the retrieval system interface, the request queue. 1 entry. But the description field was different from what I remembered. It now read, missing persons report while N last seen... And then it was cut off by the edge of the screen. I hadn't captured the full text. And the file number was blurry, the resolution was poor. I could make out SD2026, but the last 4 digits were illegible. Had it always looked like that? Had I remembered it wrong? I'd been stressed. It was a dark room, a weekend. I was already unsettled from what I'd found in the deep stacks. Memory is unreliable. I knew that from dispatch witnesses remember things differently every time they recount them. The first telling is the most accurate, and even that is only partially reliable. But I remembered my full name. I remembered Nathan R. I remembered vicinity of Hardin Street Municipal Building. The screenshot didn't show that. But I remembered it. I worked through the day. Normal requests came in. I fulfilled them. I tried to keep my routine. My routine. Pull the request. Find the file. Log it. Send it up. At lunch, I walked past Darlene's desk on the way to the break room. She was reading something, a catalog of archival supplies, it looked like. I stopped. Darlene, how long have the back sections had pre-positioned labels? She looked up. What? The deep overflow sections, the labels go way back. Years into the future, how long has that been the case? She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Nathan, I told you, that's old stuff. People who had this job before us like to prepare ahead. It's not unusual in archives work. You pre-label, you pre-position, you stay ahead of the flow. But they go to 2051. She stared at me. Something shifted in her expression. Not alarm, exactly. More like she'd heard this conversation before, or a conversation like it, and she knew where it led. Nathan, she said slowly. The back sections are not part of our active archive. They're decommissioned storage space. Whatever labels are back there, they're from a previous system, an older organizational method. They don't correspond to anything we do now. But the numbers match the format we use now. PHCLA's the same prefix system. The prefix system hasn't changed in 50 years. Of course they match. And the years? 2030? 2040? She put her glasses back on. Ah! God! Don't go back there, Nathan. I haven't been back there in years. I can't speak to what's on those labels, but I can tell you that it has nothing to do with our work here, and I'd prefer if you focused on the active retrieval queue. Her tone was the way a parent closes a conversation with a child who's asking questions that don't have answers they're willing to give. I went back to my desk. My desk. But my des. Well, taste divin'. That afternoon, 2 more forward requests came in. I logged them. I added them to my legal pad. I didn't go to the back sections to check for matching labels. I just worked. But something had changed. The rhythm of the job, that soothing monotony I'd been grateful for, was gone. Every time the notification sound went off, my chest would tighten slightly. That old dispatch feeling. The awareness that the next piece of information might be something you can't unknow. A week later, I was shelving in the sheriff's department section when I noticed something. The current file count was SD 20250847. A few months ago, someone had requested SD 20251847, the single vehicle accident on Route 9. At our current accessioning rate, we'd reach that number in, I did the math, roughly March of the following year. 2026. The description said 1 fatality. Route 9 south of mile marker 22. I drive Route 9. It's my commute home. Mile marker 22 is about 4 miles from my house, right where the road curves along the river. I want to be clear. I am not saying that request was about me. A lot of people drive Route 9. It's a main county road. Single vehicle accidents happen. I am not someone who assumes everything is about him. But I noticed it. And once I noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it. I started driving a different route home. Added 12 minutes to my commute. My wife asked why, and I said there was construction on Route 9. She didn't question it. In August, I made a decision. I was going to track one of the forward requests and see if the file it referenced actually came into existence. The public health one, PH 20250445, the communicable disease investigation at Blackford Elementary, was the one closest to potentially being real based on the accessioning rate. By my calculation, we'd reach file 0445 sometime in September or early October. So I waited. I kept working. I kept logging the forward requests. They were coming in more frequently now, almost daily. I stopped adding them to the legal pad. There were too many. I just noted them in the system as unfulfilled and moved on. In early September, the school year started. I found myself checking the local news for anything about Blackford Elementary. Nothing. Normal school year beginning. No disease outbreaks. No news. On September 22nd, a new public health file came down through the dumbwaiter for shelving. PH2 02 15 files away from 0445. On September 29th, PH2 0, 2, 5, 0, 4, 3, 8. 7 away. On October 3rd. PH2, 02, 504, 4, 1. 4 away. On October 7th, I came into work and there was a stack of files in the dumbwaiter. 5 of them, all public health. I shelved them in order. P. H. 2, 02, 504, 4, 0443. 0444. PH2, 02, 504, 5. I held it in my hands. Manila folder. Standard weight, accessioning form clipped to the front. I read the form. Communicable Disease Investigation Initial Report. Location, Blackford Elementary School, Nature, GI Illness Cluster, Suspected Norovirus. Reporting Officer, MCHEN, Environmental Health. The description wasn't identical to the one in the original request. The requested said, Cluster Identification. The actual file said, GI Illness Cluster, Suspected Neurovirus. But it was close enough. Close enough that my hands were shaking slightly as I placed the file on the shelf, in the space behind the label that had been waiting for it since before the investigation had even happened. I sat down at my desk. Why? I pulled up the original forward request from April. I looked at the description field. Communicable Disease Investigation, Blackford Elementary, Cluster Identification. It was real. The file had been requested 6 months before the event it documented had occurred. 6 months before children at Blackford Elementary had gotten sick, some terminal in the public health department had submitted a request for the file that would eventually be created to document it. I stood up. I walked to Darlene's desk. She was eating an apple, reading a paperback. Darlene. She looked up. PH 20250445. It came in today. Okay. It was in the forward queue. I received a request for it in April. The file was just created today. The request predates the file by 6 months. She set her apple down carefully on a paper napkin. She closed her book. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Right. Patience, yes. But something else underneath. Fatigue, maybe. Or resignation. Nathan, she said, I need you to listen to me carefully. This is an old building. This is an old system. Things come in out of order sometimes. It doesn't mean what you think it means. What do I think it means? I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not that. It's a filing error, a system anomaly, a procedural irregularity. That's all it is. Have you seen this before? She didn't answer immediately. She picked up her apple, looked at it, set it back down. Russell, the man who had your job before you, he got very focused on the back sections too. He spent a lot of time back there, mapping things, taking notes. He had a system for tracking things. What happened to Russell? He retired. When? About 2 years before you started. And between him and me, nobody was doing retrievals for 2 years? We had temps. They didn't last. The work it's not for everyone. Because of the forward requests? She looked at me directly then. Something hard in her eyes. Not hostile. Protective, maybe. Because it's a quiet job in a basement, and some people can't handle quiet. They start looking for patterns in the quiet. They start making the quiet into something it isn't. I'm not making anything into anything. The file exists. The request predated it. That's a fact. Then log it and move on. That's the job, Nathan. Log it and move on. She picked up her book and opened it. Conversation over. I went back to my desk. I logged PH 20250445 As fulfilled. Ac. Mac. The system accepted it without any error. The request from April, the one I'd marked as file not located 6 months ago, now showed as completed. Resolved. As if it had always been just a routine request that took a little longer than usual to fill. I should have quit. I know that. Looking back, that was the moment to put in my notice and walk away. Find another quiet job somewhere else. Data entry, maybe? Mail sorting. Something without shelves that extend into the dark, without labels waiting for events that haven't happened yet. But I didn't quit. Partly because I needed the income, partly because my wife and I were in a good rhythm finally, and I didn't want to disrupt it with another job change. And partly, honestly, mostly because I needed to know. The same way dispatch workers can't not listen to the next call, even when they know it might be bad. You have to know. So I stayed. And I started tracking more carefully. I took my legal pad and I cross-referenced every forward request with the actual accessioning rate, estimating when each file would be created. I built a timeline. A calendar of events that hadn't happened yet, documented in a filing system that seemed to already know they would. The Sheriff's Department one bothered me the most. SD 2025-1847. Single vehicle accident, Route 9, 1 fatality. Based on rates, that file would be created sometime in late February, or March 2026. A fatality. One person. On my commute route. On a curve by the river that I knew was dangerous in winter when the road got icy. I kept driving the alternate route. In November, something else happened that I haven't been able to explain. I was in the deep overflow section. I'd started going back there regularly, maybe once a week, walking further and further into the stacks. Partly mapping, partly just looking. On this particular day, I was in the far section, past 2030, past 2040, in an area where my phone flashlight was the only illumination. I'd been back about 20 minutes when I heard something. Footsteps. Behind me, in the stacks I'd already walked through. Not fast. Not running. Just measured, steady footsteps on concrete. The sound of shoes, hard-soled shoes, walking at a normal pace, somewhere in the rows behind me. I turned. 10, sen, 4, rise. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, but the shelving blocked my view of the adjacent rows. The footsteps continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. Hello? My voice sounded flat in the low-ceiling space. The concrete and metal absorbed everything. Darlene? Nothing. Silence. Then the faint hum of a dehumidifier cycling on, 2 rows over. I walked back toward the front, moving faster than I normally would, checking each row as I passed. Empty. All of them. Just shelving and labels and dust. When I got back to the main archive, Darlene was at her desk. She hadn't moved. Her radio was playing something by Merle Haggard, low and tinny. Were you just in the back section? I asked. She looked at me like I'd asked if she'd just run a marathon. Nathan, my knee. Right. Sorry. I thought I heard someone back there. Building settles, pipes. You hear all kinds of things down here. She said it like she'd said it before. Like it was a line from a script she'd memorized. After that, I heard the footsteps 2 more times over the following weeks. Always in the deep sections. Always behind me. Always stopping when I stopped. I never saw anyone. I never found evidence of anyone else being back there. But the sound was distinctive, hard-soled shoes on concrete, a measured pace. Not rushed. Not furtive. Just someone walking, as if they belonged there. As if they were doing exactly what I was doing, moving through the stacks, checking the shelves, the labels, the empty spaces. In December, I made another discovery. I was checking the labels in the clerk's office section specifically. The 2026 range. I wanted to look at CL2026. 0023 again. Judith M. Warren's death certificate. The label was still there. Still in that rounded black script. Still empty. But as I was looking at it, I noticed something about the adjacent labels I'd previously overlooked. CL-2026. -0022. Chile 2026-024. The labels next to it, before and after. They were in a different hand. Darlene's blue printing. Fresh looking, not yellowed. I stepped back and looked at the whole row. The labels alternated. Some in the old black script, yellowed. Some in Darlene's blue pen, fresh. Some in the red angular writing. I'd seen deeper in the stacks. They were interleaved as if multiple people across multiple time periods had all been preparing the same shelves for the same files, building the same system, layer upon layer. I started looking more carefully at the dates on the yellowed labels. Nah. Some of them, in the far back sections, were in handwriting styles that looked genuinely old. Not just slightly faded, structurally different. The way people form numbers in the 1950s and 60s, with specific curves and crossbars that you don't see anymore. But the file numbers they referenced were for years. That hadn't happened yet. 2030. 2040. 2050. Labels written decades ago, referencing decades that hadn't arrived. Someone in the 1960s had sat down in this basement and written labels for files that would be created in 2050. One, he said now's, unless I was wrong about the handwriting. I.e. averration. Unless I was reading patterns into pen strokes that meant nothing. Unless I was losing my mind. One. Why? While two. I went to the county HR office. Our office. HR office. Our office. I asked to see personnel records for the archive going back as far as they had them. The woman there, middle-aged, pleasant, confused by my request, pulled what she could find. The archive had been staffed since 1952. When 19. Before Darlene and before Russell, there had been a man named Thomas Packard who worked there from 1987 to 2001. Before him, a woman named June Osterman, 1974 to 1987. Before her, a man named Harold Voss, 1952 to 1974. What about retrieval staff? I asked. The people who pulled files, like my position. She looked. The position had existed since 1968. There had been 7 people in the role before me, including Russell, who had actually held it twice, once from 1996 to 2003, and again from 2015 to 2022. Between his 2 tenures, there had been 3 others, none lasting more than 2 years. Why don't people stay? I asked. The woman shrugged. It's a basement job. Not everyone likes working underground. I asked if any of the former employees were still in the area. She couldn't tell me. That? Privacy rules. But she gave me the name of Russell's last known emergency contact, which happened to be his sister, who still lived in Blackford. I found Russell through his sister. Bah! I found Russell through his sister. Bah! He agreed to meet me at a diner on the east side of town, a place called Mix, that served breakfast all day. He was older than I expected. Mid-70s, lean, with thick glasses and tremor in his left hand. He ordered coffee and a piece of pie, and he looked at me with the kind of careful assessment that you give to someone who might be crazy. "You're the new retrieval guy," he said. "How far back have you gone?" I looked at him. "To the 50s. He nodded slowly. I only made it to the 40s. 40s? Yeah. My knee was better than Darlene's, but it's still a long walk. He smiled, but it was thin. What are you seeing back there? I told him about the labels. But the multiple handwritings. The forward requests. The file that came true. He listened without interrupting, cutting his pie into small, precise pieces and eating them one at a time. When I finished, he put his fork down and looked out the window for a long time. P.A., beta. Let me ask you something, he said. Have you found any that are filled? What? Files. In the forward sections, have you found any that are already on the shelf? Not empty spaces, actual files? Number. They're all empty. He nodded. That's what I thought at first, too, but you need to look more carefully. In the deep sections past 2030, maybe 2035, look at the bottom shelves, the ones that are hard to see unless you crouch down. What's there? He shook his head. I'm not going to tell you what I think I saw because I'm not sure I saw it. I'm not sure about anything from that time. I left for a reason, Nathan. I left twice for a reason. The first time I stayed too long and He stopped, picked up his coffee. His hand was shaking badly enough that he had to use both. I lost some time. That's the best way I can describe it. I lost some time and I don't know where it went, and when I came back, I wasn't sure how much of what I remembered was real. Lost time? Weeks. Maybe a month? I was in the archive, and then I wasn't, and I couldn't account for the gap. My sister said I'd been home, going to work, living normally. But I don't remember any of it. It's just absent, like someone cut a section out of a tape. And the second time? The second time I was more careful. I went back because I thought if I was careful, if I set rules for myself, didn't go past a certain point, didn't stay past 5, always kept someone knowing where I was, I could figure it out. Map it. Understand the system. Did you? He looked at me. His eyes were watery behind his glasses, and I couldn't tell if it was age or emotion. The system isn't for understanding, he said. The system is the understanding. That's what I couldn't accept. There's no one operating it. There's no one filling in the labels. The labels are the archive. The archive isn't a record of things that happen. Things happen because they've been archived. I waited for him to say something else. Why? See. Why? Oh. Asked. He didn't. He finished his coffee and asked for the check. What should I do? I asked. You should quit, he said. But you won't. He was right. I didn't quit. Instead, the next day is Saturday again. My wife thought I was catching up on filing. I went to the deep stacks. Past 2030. Past 2035. I brought a better flashlight this time, a proper work light that plugged into the extension cord I'd run from the main archive. I crouched down and looked at the bottom shelves. They weren't empty. On the lowest shelf of a unit labeled CL2037, pushed to the very back, there were files. Maybe a dozen of them. I pulled one out. It was in a folder that looked and felt exactly like the folders we used currently, same weight, same tab cut, same accessioning form clipped to the front. But the paper inside was different. 1000 was BA. Slightly different texture. Slightly different whiteness. And the printing it was laser printed, like all our current files. But the font was different. Slightly. The kind of difference you'd only notice if you'd been handling current files every day for months. The accessioning form was filled out. CL20370156. Deed transfer. Residential property. 890 Willowbrook Lane. Grant to Hernandez. The date on the form was March 14th, 2037. I looked at other files on the bottom shelves. B. They were scattered, not continuous, just a handful here and there, tucked low and pushed back as if hidden. Or as if they'd been there so long that no one remembered to check. Some were in other sections, too. Public health files, from 2039. Assessor's files from 2041. All with the same slightly different paper, the slightly different font. All describing mundane transactions. Deed transfers. Permits. Inspection reports. Death certificates. I pulled one of the death certificates. Salin 2033801. Death certificate, Mayor. Robert K. DOD, May 22nd, 2038. I photographed everything. I put the files back exactly where I'd found them. I went home. That night, I looked up Robert K. Mayer. I found a Robert K. Mayer in Blackford, age 42, who ran a small landscaping business. His Facebook profile was he looked healthy. He had a post from the previous week about his daughter's soccer game. According to a file I'd held in my hands, he would die on May 22nd, 2038. He'd be 55. I don't know how to describe what this knowledge does to a person. It isn't like knowing someone is terminally ill that at least comes with context, with cause, with a time frame that makes emotional sense. This was just information. Cold bureaucratic information. A date on a form. And I couldn't unknow it. I also couldn't verify it. Not for 13 years. And by then, if it were true, the verification would be meaningless. For the next few weeks, I tried to work normally. As Jess dressed. As Jess dressed. My fastre. I tried to do what Darlene said, log it and move on. I failed. I was sleeping poorly. I was losing weight. My wife was worried. She asked if I wanted to go back to my doctor or maybe try medication. I said I'd think about it. The forward requests kept coming. Daily now. Sometimes multiple per day. I logged them mechanically. I didn't check the stacks anymore. I didn't need to. I knew the labels were there. I knew the spaces were waiting. Then, in January of 2026, two things happened. On January 12th, 2 days before the date listed on the death certificate for Judith M. Warren, I drove to Birch Lane. When desta, when the trounders in Manassa commends I, when dest I, when ciders in Manassa when desta, when desta when, and trounders in Manassa when dastas, when desta. I don't know what I was planning to do. Meh. Why? They. Knock on her door? Van he. Tell her that a filing system in the county basement had her death scheduled for Tuesday? What would I even say? I parked across the street from 203 Birch Lane. It was a small ranch house, white siding, a little worn. There was a car in the driveway, a blue Hyundai sedan. Lights were on inside. Someone was home. I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Well, asked Jest. Well, Tad, by Pat, won my cane. I didn't get out. I didn't knock. I drove home. On January 14th, I checked the obituaries in the county newspaper. Judith M. Warren, age 73 of Birch Lane, passed away at home on January 14th. Survived by 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. Services at Blackford Memorial Chapel. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the browser and sat at my desk in the archive and listened to the hum of the lights and the distant ticking of the pipes, and I felt something crack inside me. Not break. Crack. The way a foundation cracks, the house still stands, but something structural is now compromised, and you know it's only a matter of time before the weight above becomes too much. The second thing that happened was this. Mascast. I came in one morning and found a new request in the queue. It was the one from before. Oh, dives Missing persons report, while Nathan R., last seen vicinity of Hardin Street Municipal Building. It was back in the system. as if it had never been deleted. Same terminal ID. Same timestamp from the Saturday months ago when I'd been alone in the building. Except now the date had updated. The request submission date now read January 15th, 2026. I stared at it. I checked the system logs. The log showed it had been submitted on January 15th at 7:15 a.m., 15 minutes before Darlene would have arrived. 15 minutes before anyone should have been at any terminal in the building. I looked across the room at Darlene. She was reading her catalog again. Her radio was playing. Everything was normal. Darlene? She looked up. There's a request in the system with my name in it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Show me. I turned my monitor so she could see. Ooh. She stood up slowly, favoring her knee, and walked over. She put on her glasses and read the screen. She read it twice. Then she straightened up and looked at me. Delete it, she said. I can't delete requests. The system doesn't allow. I'll delete it. She leaned past me, typed something in admin command I'd never seen, and the request disappeared. The queue was empty again. She looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. She straightened up. Darlene didn't look like someone who got frightened. She straightened up, but uncertain. Like someone making a decision they'd been putting off. She straightened up. Nathan, she said, I'm going to tell you something, and then I want you to take the rest of the day off, and I want you to think carefully about whether you want to keep working here. She straightened up. When I started here 22 years ago, the woman who had my job before me, June, she was still around for the transition. She was retiring, but she stayed 2 weeks to train me. On her last day, she told me something. She said, The archive works correctly. It has always worked correctly. Your job is to let it work correctly. You file what comes down. You pull what's requested. You don't go looking for things that aren't ready to be found. And you don't read ahead. Darlene paused. I asked her what she meant. She said, Some people who work retrieval start reading ahead. They go to the back sections. They start trying to understand the filing system as if it's something separate from the files. It isn't. The system is the files of the system. You can't read the catalog without being in the catalog. Darlene took off her glasses and cleaned them on the hem of her cardigan. She straightened up. Her hands were steady. I thought June was senile, she said. She was 79. She'd worked down here for 13 years. I thought the solitude had gotten to her. I ignored what she said. I came in, I did the job, I didn't go to the back sections because of my knee and because there was no reason to. I let the work be what it is, and in 22 years I have never received a request with my name in it. She put her glasses back on. Go home, Nathan. Think about it. She straightened up. I thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, I went back to work. She straightened up. I don't know what. She straightened up. I went back because the file number was SD202600003. She straightened up. The third file, the Sheriff's Department, would accession in 2026. She straightened up. We were still in January. At most, they'd done 1 or 2 files for the new year so far. File 0003 wasn't far away. She straightened up. It was imminent. It could be created any day. And if it was created, if someone filed a missing persons report for me, that meant I was going to go missing? Unless I could get ahead of it. Unless I could do something that would prevent the file from being necessary. If the archive recorded what was going to happen, and the events then happened to fill the archive, what would happen if the person in the file took action? If Judith Warren had gone to the hospital on January 13th, would she still have died on the 14th? Whoa. Then new drivers and setter, would she... Time do it. Would she still have died on the 14th? If I didn't disappear, Could file SD202600003 still be created? She straightened up. I kept coming to work. She straightened up. I kept my routine visible. I told my wife where I was at all times. I texted her on my lunch break. I signed in and out with a security guard. I made myself unforgettable, unlosable, impossible to file under missing. She straightened up. The Sheriff's Department file count for 2026 held at SD202600002. Then, in early February, a new file came down the dumbwaiter. 1D206. 0003. She straightened up. I held it. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. She straightened up. Incident report. Noise complaint. 44 Ridge Road. Unfounded. She straightened up. A noise complaint. She straightened up. Not a missing persons report. She straightened up. A noise complaint. She straightened up. I almost laughed. I did laugh. Actually, a short, sharp sound that echoed strangely in the empty stacks. She straightened up. She straightened up. Completely mundane. A noise complaint that turned out to be nothing. She straightened up. The system was wrong. She straightened up. The request had been wrong. The future wasn't fixed after all, or the request had been an error or something, had changed, or I filed it. I put it on the shelf. One nah. SD202600003. In its labeled space, which had been waiting for it. And I noticed, as I slid it into place, that the label, the one in the plastic holder, was in Darlene's handwriting. She straightened up, blue pen. She straightened up, and next to it, where SD202600004 should be, there was no label. The next label in the sequence was SD2026005. Space for 0004 existed. The physical gap was there, but the label holder was empty. She straightened up. I went to Darlene's desk. There's no label for SD202600004. She straightened up. She didn't look up. I'll make one when the file comes in. You always make them in advance. She straightened up. She straightened up. She straightened up. Nathan. Not every file gets a label in advance. Some files I wait for. She straightened up. Because some files shouldn't be expected. I didn't understand what she meant. Or maybe I did, and I didn't want to accept it. If the labels were part of the system, if the labels were what made the files real, what made the events happen, then a file without a pre-existing label was a file that hadn't been predetermined. An event that hadn't been cataloged in advance. Something that could still go either way. Darlene had removed the label for SD202600004. She had removed my missing persons report from the system. Not just deleted the request to remove the label. Removed the space that the file would have filled. She straightened up. Did you remove? Go back to work, Nathan. She straightened up. But as I walked back to my desk, I looked over my shoulder at her. She was writing something, printing carefully, in blue ballpoint pen, on a small white card. When she finished, she slid it into a plastic label holder and placed it in a box on her desk. I couldn't see what it said from that distance. I thought about what Russell had said. The archive isn't a record of things that happen. Things happen because they've been archived. And what June apparently told Darlene. You can't read the catalog without being in the catalog. I thought about the footsteps in the deep stacks. She straightened up. Someone walking behind me. She straightened up. Unhurried. She straightened up. The sound of someone working. I thought about the multiple handwritings on the labels. Harold Voss, 1952 to 1974. She straightened up. June Osterman. She straightened up. She straightened up. She straightened up. all of them making labels. All of them pre-positioning spaces for files that hadn't been created yet. She straightened up. She straightened up, decades in advance, building the shelves that events would eventually fill. She straightened up. She straightened up. She straightened up. Is there a difference? I'm still working at the archive. It's been a few months since the SD20260003 incident. The forward. Requests still come in. I still log them as unfulfilled. I still find them, eventually, fulfilled the files coming into existence one by one, filling the spaces that were prepared for them. I don't go to the back sections anymore. I don't look at the bottom shelves. No. Look. No. Nah. Why? The A. Why as? Though. She straightened up. I don't read ahead. She straightened up. But I've noticed something new. Something I'm not sure how to interpret. Darlene has been teaching me the labeling system. My tain that with comes 7 9 D Y I my tay why Darlene has been teaching me the labeling system. Not officially, she hasn't said. I'm training you. But she started asking me to make labels for upcoming files. She straightened up. Nathan, we're running low on assessor's labels for this quarter. Would you mind printing up a few? She straightened up. I write them in my own handwriting, which is somewhere between neat and careless, in black pen because I prefer it, and I slide them into holders and I place them on the shelves ahead of the files. And I wonder, sometimes, if somewhere in the deep stacks, past 2030, past 2040, in sections I've never reached, my handwriting is already on some of those labels. She straightened up. She straightened up. If I will write them. She straightened up. Last week, Darlene was out sick again. I was alone in the archive. And a request came in, a forward request. A file number that won't be assigned for months. She straightened up. The description read, Personnel file, archive services, while Nathan R., date of hire 2024, date of promotion 2026, role lead archivist. She straightened up. Darlene is 60. She straightened up, and when she does, someone will need to continue the labels. Someone will need to keep the shelves prepared. Keep the system working correctly, the way it has always worked. She straightened up. The notification tone sounded. She straightened up. Another request. She straightened up. I opened it. The file number was one I recognized. Not because it was mine this time, but because it was for a section I'd never seen in the physical stacks. The prefix was AR, a department code that doesn't exist in our current system. ARH 2020 IC0001. She straightened up. Archive accession log, self-referencing entry, initial. She straightened up. She straightened up. The system had requested a file from itself. She straightened up. She straightened up. I logged it as unfulfilled. Then I got up, walked to the shelves, found the section where the AR label should be if they existed, and looked. There was a single shelf unit I'd never noticed before. It was positioned against the back wall of the main archive room, not in the overflow section. Not hidden, I'd walked past it hundreds of times. But I'd never registered it as significant because it wasn't labeled with any department code I was looking for. She straightened up. It was just a shelf unit with a single plastic label holder at eye level. She straightened up. The label read. She straightened up. Below it, on the top shelf, was one item. She straightened up. She straightened up. A small notebook. leather-bound, old, with pages that had gone brown at the edges. She straightened up. The first page had a list of names, written in multiple hands, in multiple inks, across what appeared to be decades. She straightened up. Harold Voss. She straightened up. June Osterman. She straightened up. She straightened up. Russell Mays. She straightened up. Darlene Kemper. Below Darlene's name, in fresh blue ink, there was a new entry. She straightened up. She straightened up. Written in Darlene's handwriting. The date next to it was today's date. She straightened up. I closed the notebook. I put it back on the shelf. I went back to my desk. The terminal showed no pending requests. She straightened up. She straightened up. Fluorescent lights humming. She straightened up. Dehumidifiers cycling. She straightened up. The distant sound of pipes. I sat there for a long time. Then I opened my desk drawer and took out a stack of blank label cards. She straightened up. She straightened up. I'm not going to tell you what I wrote. I'm not sure I could. Even if I wanted to, the specifics blur, the way details blur when you try to remember a dream. She straightened up. She straightened up. Label after label. File numbers and dates that felt correct, that felt like they belonged in the spaces I knew were waiting in the deep stacks. My hand moved and the labels accumulated, and the afternoon disappeared into the sound of pen on cardstock and the hum of the building around me. When I stopped, it was past 6. Darlene's shift had ended hours ago, or would have, if she'd been there. Die, and 10,000 so, or ras, and have. Oh, says. What? Why? Bien. What? Or would have. If she'd been there. She straightened up. The stack of completed labels was maybe 2 inches thick. I gathered them up and walked into the stacks. She straightened up. I don't remember walking through the sections, finding the right positions, sliding cards into holders. But the next morning when I came in and walked through the main archive, I noticed new labels in sections where I was sure there had been gaps the day before. She straightened up. She straightened up. Black pen. Filling in where others had left spaces. It's been 2 weeks since then. She straightened up. I feel calm. I feel like I did in the first 3 months, soothed by the monotony, grateful for the quiet. I no longer hear the footsteps in the deep stacks. Or rather, I no longer find them alarming. Someone walking through the archive, preparing shelves for what comes next that's not frightening. She straightened up. That's just the work. My wife says I seem better. She says the tension in my shoulders has eased. She says I'm sleeping through the night again. She straightened up. The forward requests still come in. I still log them as unfulfilled. But now, when I do, I feel something I can only describe as recognition. She straightened up, not surprise, not dread. She straightened up. She straightened up. She straightened up. That file doesn't exist yet. But the space for it does. And someday, something will happen. A deed will transfer, a permit will be issued. A person will die, and a file will be created and sent down through the dumbwaiter, and I will take it to the shelf where its label has been waiting. Some of them for years, some for decades, and I will place it in its space, and the record will be complete. I'm going to be here for a long time. She straightened up. I know that now. I know it the way you know your own name, not as something you decided, but as something that was always true. Last night, I drove home on Route 9. I passed mile marker 22 where the road curves along the river. The asphalt was wet from earlier rain and the curve felt tighter than I remembered. For a moment, I thought about SD 2025147, the single vehicle accident, one fatality. That file won't be created until next month, based on the current rate. Someone will die on that curve. She straightened up. The description didn't include a name. She straightened up. It didn't include a name. She straightened up. I'm sure of that. She straightened up. Almost sure. She straightened up. I read it months ago. She straightened up. She straightened up. I took the curve carefully. She straightened up. She straightened up. She straightened up. I went to bed. Tomorrow I'll go back to the archive. There will be requests to fulfill. She straightened up. She straightened up. She straightened up. The system works correctly. She straightened up. It has always worked correctly. I'm just not entirely sure anymore whether I'm running it or whether it's running me. And I'm less sure, with each passing week, that there's a difference.